Hi everyone, this is Hector Garcia. We're about to get started with our QuickBooks Online certification preparation part 1. What I like to do is I like to test the questions box, and if you can hear me okay, I want you to just type the word okay in the questions box. Okay, perfect. So I do have a couple of okays here. We have about 300 people logged in so far, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. That will allow us to get started. Go ahead and put your questions in the questions box as we do the presentation. Keep in mind that this presentation will be 100% focused on the certification training. So we're gonna try to stay as much as possible within the materials. If there are some questions that are relative, I'll try to answer them during the presentation. If they're just way off, maybe I won't answer them, or maybe someone else from the chat box will let you know that it's not part of the presentation. But yeah, do use the questions box if something that I explained wasn't clear. So my name is Hector Garcia. I'm an advanced certified QuickBooks Pro Advisor. I'm a member of the Intuit Trainer Writer Network, and I'm a co-host of a webinar series called QB Power Hour. There's my email if you need to reach out to me directly for whatever reason. There's my contact information. Now, if you're watching this live, if you're logged in to GoToWebinar and you are live, make sure that you take a look at the GoToWebinar control box. There's going to be a handout section where you can download the handouts, such as the slides that we're presenting with today. And there's also an Excel file for a new file checklist, a new client checklist that we're going to talk about briefly. And if you have any issues with GoToWebinar specifically, make sure you reach out the contact page for GoToWebinar directly. But do use the questions box for any questions that you may have. And if you by any chance didn't get the slides, you can email accountant_training@intuit.com to request them, but you should have already received them prior to the webinar. So some additional resources worth mentioning is if you go to qbtrainingevents.com, you're going to have 3 sections: the webinar section, the in-person training, and the virtual conference. Where you're attending now, it's a webinar. Intuit also 2 to 3 times a year, they do a physical in-person tour where they do trainings on site. So you may want to check out the in-person training tab for that. And there's also virtual conferences that also get run about 2 to 3 times a year for advanced certification. And the training materials are going to be both in that email and in that handout section of the navigation box. If you are attending live, you will get 2.5 hours of CPE. You must attend the entire webinar, and you must also answer every polling question. We're going to ask a total of 8 polling questions during the next 2.5 hours. And they will only be up for about a minute or 2, so you have to be on the webinar itself to be able to react to them rather quickly. And also you will get those CPE certificates emailed to you within a couple of weeks. Now, we're also making the assumption that you have prepared for the webinar, at least by creating your own ProAdvisor account. It's a free account. If you have not done so, go to quickbooks.com/ProAdvisor or the bit.ly link that you see on the screen. You must set up your account first before logging in and being able to take your exam. It is free, and you must have a login in order to be able to get your certification done. Now, we will have 1 10-minute break in the middle of the webinar. Again, the questions will be only related to the content that's being presented. And if you want to play with QuickBooks Online on another screen or something like that while we're doing the presentation, we suggest that you use the test drive. The link to the test drive is on the screen. You can also just Google QBO test drive, and it'll also get you straight to it. So there's 2 ways to get to it. Now, once you are logged into your ProAdvisor account, your QuickBooks Online accountant account, you can click on the ProAdvisor tab on the left-hand side, and then on the training tab on the top, and you'll be able to access both the basic training that's not certificate driven, and there's a couple of videos and handouts having to do with the basic QuickBooks Online training, and then you can access a QuickBooks Online certification training, all from the website. The test has 7 sections. On this first half, we cover the first couple. it will be a multiple choice. You must submit each section and completely submit it in order to go for full grading. You're going to submit all 7 sections. At the end of your submittal, you must have 80% of each section to pass. If you pass any individual sections, you will pass them and not have to redo them. If you fail any of the individual sections, it will let you know which sections you failed and which areas you need to go back and check the materials for. You only need to retake those that were not passed, and you will have 3 attempts. If you fail all 3 attempts, there will be a 60-day lockout, which means you have to wait 60 days to retake the exam. Okay, those are the 7 sections: setting up your clients, setting up supporting your small business clients, banking and tools, reporting, managing work, preparing your clients' books, and QuickBooks solutions. We will do the first couple on this first half of the presentation that I'll be doing today. Okay, so we're 5 minutes in. Let's go ahead and get the polling system set up. So let's ask the first polling question. Again, you must answer, you must give any answers in order to get your CPE certificates. There's no right or wrong answer. So please, let's get started with the first polling question. So the first polling question is up and running, and you should be able to answer it. While the polling question is up, let me answer a question that was asked in the questions box. This is not the recertification course. This is the full QuickBooks Online certification course for anyone that has not been certified with QuickBooks Online before. So there is no official course for recertification, just for the simple certification. So please answer the polling question in the polling question box. And again, this will be the first half of a 5-hour certification course that will cover all 7 sections of the full QuickBooks Online certification. If you need to take the recertification exam, you don't need to take this course. You're welcome to take it, of course, but this will cover a lot more than the information that's covered in the recertification exam. Okay, the polling question is up for about a minute. We have 96% of the votes. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Thank you very much. And let's get started with the content. So we're going to start with Module 1, setting up your clients. So Module 1, setting up clients. So we'll start by setting up your clients, which basically means that we either are going to create a new client under our QuickBooks Online accountant account, or we're going to have a client that already has set up their own account and they're going to add us as an accountant. So either one will fall into the category of quote unquote setting up your clients. So we'll create a new QuickBooks Online company. We'll show you what that process looks like. And then we're going to go through the settings. We're going to go in depth through all the settings. And there are a couple of test questions around the settings specifically. So you want to pay attention, close attention to this part. We'll also talk about the chart of accounts. We'll talk about the items or products and services. We'll talk about adding customers, vendors, setting up some additional tasks, and managing multiple team members in your accountant firm and the specific client access that will be for those team members. Okay, so let's set up, we're going to do this all scenario based. So we're about to meet a brand new client who wants the best possible accountant solution, and they're looking for a QuickBooks ProAdvisor around. So in each lesson, we're going to kind of talk about the concept of the client, what they want, and then we'll talk about some of the practical applications or how we go about supporting the client and giving them the best possible solution. Okay, so we have a new client. Her name is Terry. Terry has a small IT company called Terry's Tech. She offers IT support to small businesses. She sets up and maintains hardware and software, and she does some on-site and virtual support services. She's been in business for less than a year. She has a pretty small customer base, but she's growing. She went ahead and created her own access to QuickBooks, or she has her own Intuit account because she's already had some sort of service that she's done with QuickBooks before. And we're going to go ahead and collect some information for her, from her, so we can recommend the best possible solution. Okay, we're gonna set up her company. We're gonna do some essential settings, and we're gonna set up the company for her. So let's get started with the fact that she already has an Intuit ID. And this is a common issue that we have when our customers already have access to Intuit because of previous services that they had. Maybe she had QuickBooks Desktop in the past. Maybe she set up a trial for QuickBooks Online at some point in time. There's just a reason why when she tries to create an account, it tells her that there's already an access to it. So that's going to be a little bit different than setting up a brand new account from scratch. However, when she goes into QuickBooks.com or Intuit.com and clicks on one of the links to go into the QuickBooks software, she's going to have three choices. She's going to have to choose between Simple Start, Essentials, and Plus. We have determined already, and we're going to get deeper into the different versions of QuickBooks later on. We have determined that self-employed is not the best choice for her. And let's assume that we went through all the different choices and we picked QuickBooks Online Plus. So what the user normally would do is they would select the Plus version, click on Buy Now. In some cases, it will say Start Free Trial. It's actually the same exact screen. And when she first logs in, if she already has a QuickBooks login or an Intuit ID, she's going to have to scroll down all the way to the bottom where it says Add a company to an existing account. So this would be different if she's never logged into QuickBooks before or never had an Intuit ID. If that was the case, she would just create the username and password right from the get-go. But if she already has an Intuit ID, it's really important to keep in mind that you need to scroll down all the way to the bottom and click on Add Existing Company or Add Company with Existing Login. So once she signs in and finishes the new company setup, the first question will be what is the company name, or what is the name of the business. So at that point, she will type Terry's Tech or whatever the name of the business is. Terry's Tech Inc., Terry's Tech Corp, Terry's Tech LLC, whatever happens to be. And she would put there how long she's been in business. And this is only relevant how long they've been in business if you want the user to be prompted to entering opening balances from previous years and that sort of thing. We're going to keep it simple in this case. And because she just started her business, we're just going to put there less than a year. Okay, we're going to go ahead and click on next, and that will take us to the next screen. The next screen is basically going to ask us, what does the user focus on? Does it focus on invoices? Does it focus on expenses, on inventory? And that second screen is only really useful for prompting the user to what they're supposed to be doing in terms of setup. But for the most part, that's really all they need to do is just click in All Set. It doesn't really matter what options they select there on that second screen. Then let's talk about the process. Now, when the client signs up to QuickBooks on their own, this is the accountant doesn't create the account for the user. The client actually has to invite you as the accountant from inside QuickBooks Online. Once they send you the invitation, you as the accountant, you will receive an email. You will have to accept the invitation. You will have to log in to your own credentials. You will not be using your client's credentials. You will log into your own credentials and accept that invitation. And then afterwards, you will see the client show up in your client list. Now, what does it look like when your client invites you as an accountant? So they're going to click on the gear menu and they're going to click on Manage Users. They're going to scroll to the bottom where it says Invite Accountant. And when they click on Invite Accountant, they're going to have to enter your email address, assuming that the person I'm talking to right now is the accountant's email address. And they're going to put the first name and the last name of the accountant. That's really optional. It really doesn't matter if they get that right or wrong. Then they're going to click on Next. It's going to say that it finished, that it's all done. And then you will go back to the timeline that I showed before, where the accountant yourself will receive the email, accept it, and log in to add it to your account. So just keep that in mind. It's really, really important for the client to add you as an accountant. That's a really important process, to add you as an accountant afterwards by clicking on the gear menu, Manage Users. And your client can actually have up to 2 accountants set up at a time. Now we're going to go back for a second on the process that we recommend that you take in order to recommend the best possible version of QuickBooks to your client. So we kind of skipped it through in the process because we assume that the client signed up on their own and they picked their own QuickBooks file on their own. But if you are going to be working with your client hand in hand, and you will be recommending the best QuickBooks Online solution for them, it's useful that you download the new client checklist, which you should see it on the handout section. I also copy and pasted a downloadable link in the chat section, so you can see that as well. And this is an Excel file, and this Excel file allows you to enter the client's information and then interview your client about features. So you'll be asking questions about, do you need sales receipts? Do you need to manage accounts payable? Do you need to do recurring transactions? Do you need to track expenses by customer? And that sort of thing. Let me show you what that spreadsheet looks like real quick. So you should be seeing the spreadsheet as we speak. I'm showing the spreadsheet on the screen. And basically you will go through this questionnaire with your client, and you will click on the drop-down menu and click yes next to each section, where your client will say yes, that they need access to those features. Now, based on where they say yes, you will actually know, it's color-coded, whether or not they're going to be needing QuickBooks Essentials, Plus, or Simple Start. And if there's obviously a price difference between them, as of the date of the recording, Simple Start is $15, Essentials is $30, and Essentials is $35, and Online Plus is $60. So if your client sees any of these costs as cost prohibitive, it's important that they know what they will be losing by choosing the smaller or the lesser of the subscription. So this becomes just a really useful spreadsheet for you to take notes, for you to write some notes with your client. It even asks questions about vehicle and insurance, and just some additional notes that you can keep in track. Some are relative to QuickBooks, some are not relative to QuickBooks, but it's a pretty good new client intake spreadsheet that you can use. So we strongly recommend that you go through it and use it if it's useful for your practice, and of course useful for recommending the best possible version of QuickBooks. Okay, all right, let's talk about company settings. So after the company has been set up, it is best practice for the accounting professional, the ProAdvisor, to sit down with the client and go through all the settings to make sure that you turn on and off all the things that are relevant to the company or to Terry's business. So what we're going to do is we're going to log in from our own account. And once we log in from our own account, we're going to see our client in our new client checklist, in our new client list. If you click on the Clients tab on the left-hand side, once you're logged in as an accountant, or you click on the top navigation bar on the Client Switcher, you should see Terry's Tech in there because she invited you as an accountant. Okay, so once you log into their account, you must be inside their books, and then we're going to go into the settings. To go into the settings, we're going to click on the gear menu on the top right of the screen, and then we're going to click on Account and Settings. So that's where we're going to go to change the settings of our specific client of Terry's Tech. Now, inside the settings, there's a couple of subsections. There's company, billing and subscription, sales, expenses, payments, and advance. So let's start with company. What kind of information are we going to change in the company settings? So one, of course, will be the company name. This is where you enter the company's legal name and their DBA name if they happen to have some sort of trade name. You're going to put the EIN number, which is really important for payroll or for 1099. So that's also very relevant for tax. You're going to put the company type, and this is really mostly important for naming the capital account. So if this is a corporation or an LLC, there's going to be different terminology on the capital account. So that's really, really important. Also, you need to be able to match this up if you're ever going to use QuickBooks Online to prepare a tax return with Intuit tax software that connects to QuickBooks Online. You want the stuff to be you want it to be the correct account as well. So that's the company type section. Then obviously contact info, which is particularly important for the return address for the email. So when you email your invoices or when you email your purchase orders, you need to know what is the contact information that the customer is going to see when they print the invoice or when they reply back to those emails. So that contact info is crucial. And then the company's physical address, which is also really important for tax forms, and also if you want to include them in your forms, such as invoices and things like that, that would be most useful. And then just a simple opt-in or opt-out if you want to have communications with Intuit regarding promos and things like that they may have around QuickBooks. Okay, so those are the company general settings. Let me see if there's any questions. Somebody says, where do I get the new client spreadsheet? So that's going to be in the handout section. If you click on handouts and then click on new client spreadsheet, you should be able to download that. Or if you go into the chat, I copy and pasted that link in there right when we got started, but I'll go ahead and do it again. So I'll copy and paste that again. So that link is in there. So in the chat section, you can click on the link, or in the handout section to download that spreadsheet. Okay, let's move on to sales settings. So we need to, so we're going back to the same case, right? We're talking about, Terry's Tech, our new customer. So her business is taking off. She has a growing customer base. She's creating invoices right now using maybe Microsoft Word or Excel or something like that. And what we want to do is we want to personalize QuickBooks Online so she can do all the invoices through QuickBooks directly. Okay, so we're going to go into the sales settings. So we're going to also go back into the gear menu and click on account and settings. Then we're going to click on the sales tab on the left hand side. On the sales tab, we're going to have a couple of options here. We're going to have the customize area. That's going to allow us to design the invoice. So we can design the colors, we can add the logos. There's a couple of choices in terms of style, font style and font sizes. There's some content section where we can choose what data points, the item name, the item description we want to show in the invoice itself. And we can also change a couple of things in terms of, whether or not there's going to be a payment button for customers to pay online, and what it will look like when they get the email in their mailbox. So on the sales form content, this is going to be the default settings. So for example, if you want all the invoices to be defaulted to maybe 30 days or 60 days, obviously every customer can be changed case by case. So you can actually have some customers that you give 30-day terms, some customers 60, some customers, to be paid immediately. You can create your own terms if you want to. But this will be the default setting. So if you don't set up the terms for a specific customer, this will be the one that shows up by default. You can also configure some custom fields, such as service date. So you can enable and disable a service date column in the invoice in case you want to track the specific date of the service inside of the invoice. You can also enable some custom fields. You can enable a discount box if you want to give discounts on an invoice. And you can enable a deposit box if you want to keep track of an invoice that you issued in which the customer paid a deposit up front. There's also the products and services settings. These are really important. So this is where you can pick and choose whether you want to actually show the quantity, the rate in the columns, or you just want to show a lump sum total. You can also choose whether or not you want to have a SKU column. So if you want to have an item name and the SKU, which would be a numerical code in some cases, that sort of thing. This is where you can add that as an option. You can also enable or disable inventory if you want to track inventory quantity on hand in here. This is where you can choose to do that. And there's also a price rule section that allows you to create price tables or price discounts per customer or per group of customers. So that's also a really important piece. Okay, there's a question in the box saying, do you calculate discounts automatically based on early pay? So the answer is no, Vicky. There's no early pay discounts automatically in there. Okay, perfect. Now, the messages section is what the default text on the email will look like. So when you email a client an invoice or you email a vendor a purchase order, is the default text that you want to see on that mail message. You actually can modify the text on every email that you send or in every purchase order you send per email that you send. On every single case you can modify it, but messages would allow you to set the default text just in case you want to send the same message to everyone when you send an email. And the same thing for reminders. So if you are going to send a reminder to a client about an open invoice, what you want that text to look like. Now, one area that's extremely important, you want to pay close attention to this, is the online delivery function. So on the online delivery function, you have a choice to send standard emails via HTML format or PDF. So you want to attach it as a PDF, or you can send what's called online invoices. Now, online invoices are a digital representation of your QuickBooks invoice in your client's mailbox, but it's interactive. So if the invoice has been paid and the customer opens that invoice in the future, that invoice will show paid. That's only with the online invoice feature. The online invoice feature is also really important once you enable payments, so customers can click on pay and they can pay electronically. It will also keep track of when the email was opened, so you can actually see, as the business owner, you can see when the customer opened that email if you have online invoices, and you can also interact with your client. So your client can actually send you a question or a message about that invoice with the online invoice feature. If you don't want online invoices and you just want to email an invoice in PDF format, you can do that simply by enabling that and enabling the attach as a PDF feature. But if you want the full functionality I described, you have to make sure that in this sales section of your accountant settings, you actually disable the PDF feature. You wanna disable that PDF feature, and you wanna do the online invoice feature. Okay, and then also a statement. So this is all up to you if you wanna show a statement balance inside of the invoice or not. That would be the last section. Now this is a zoom in real quick on that online delivery portion, and this is what the drop-down menu looks like. So again, you want to do online invoices and you want to uncheck the PDF if you want the interactive digital version of that invoice. Again, the features are that you can interact with your customer with questions, you can know when the invoice was opened, and they can pay you electronically. If you don't want to use any of those options, then you can just opt out to not do online invoices and send a PDF version of the email instead. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go to the expense settings now, because expense settings are really important. So we're gonna go to the expense settings. So again, going back to the same client, we have Terry's Tech, and Terry's Tech bills and expenses. They get bills and they make expenses for different things like office supplies and utilities. And in some cases, she pays those expenses right away. In some cases, she wants to enter the expenses and pay them later in the future. So what we want is to help our client enter those accounts payable in QuickBooks and keep track of that accounts payable even after before they pay them, or even after they know that the expenditure exists. So we're going to talk about those settings and what that looks like. So in the accountant and settings section, in the gear menu, accountant and settings, we're going to click on the expenses tab, and you're going to have a couple of options. We're going to have the bill and expenses options, where we're going to have the ability to include items in our purchase forms. And this is particularly important if we purchase inventory or if we keep track of itemized level type of expenses, because maybe we want to itemize that expense and get reimbursed by the client, or we want to track specific expenses at the item level. Now, items could be inventory parts or they could be non-inventory parts. Either way, you need to have the QuickBooks Online Plus option, the subscription level, in order to have access to this particular feature. So if you have essentials, you can still keep track of bills, but you can't add items into bills. The other really important option is if you want to keep track of expenses by customer or expenses by vendor, maybe because you want to pull a profit and loss report by customer and include all the expenditures that you had for that particular customer, you want that checkbox that says track expenses by items or customer. Also, if you specifically want QuickBooks to keep track of expenditures that you need to get reimbursed in, so you're going to invoice your client for those specific items, you want to get reimbursed for it, you have to have this checkbox in there. Now, if you want by default all the expenses to be marked as billable, that's an option for you. You can still have this option off, and then you can manually check what you want to mark as billable. So you don't have to automatically make all the expenses that you charge by customer billable. But by enabling this feature, you can actually start setting some of the really important options. Like, for example, do you want to have a default markup on these items? So some clients want to get reimbursed from their customers, but don't necessarily need to make any margin on it. And some clients want to make some margin on it, so it's really up to you. And then as you mark those items billable, you can actually pick whether or not you want that item to go back into a single account, or do you want to have sort of an income account for the reimbursable items and a cost account for the cost portion of the item. So it's really up to you how you want to manage those reimbursables, or how your client wants to manage reimbursables. Then within the theme of QuickBooks Online Plus, which is the only version that allows you to manage inventory or purchase orders, you will have the option to turn on purchase orders. So if you turn on purchase orders, that allows you to create a worksheet of what you're going to spend in the future, or what you're ordering that you're going to eventually get a bill from a vendor in the future. And purchase orders are non-posting transactions, but they're really useful for you to keep track of what you're ordering and you will pay in the future to your vendors. Now, the messages section is where you create the default text that's going to show up on those purchase orders when you send a purchase order to your vendors. And that's it for that section. So let's go ahead and run the secondary polling question. And again, just a reminder, if you want your CPE certificates, it's really important that you attend the full webinar and you answer all of the polling questions. Okay, let's go ahead and resume. Okay, so let's move on to payment settings. So on the payment settings, this has to do with whether or not you want to enable your QuickBooks to use the sort of the merchant processor, or the payment merchant processor to process payments, or enable users or your customers to pay electronically via QuickBooks. Okay, so so to do that, we're gonna go into the gear menu and we're gonna go to account and settings, and we're gonna click on the payments tab. But first, let's understand exactly what this is. So QuickBooks Online and Intuit offers either a monthly fee plan with a reduced rate, and a sort of a no fee plan that has a little bit of a higher rate for each transaction that is processed, or for each invoice that is paid electronically. I'm not going to mention the rates on the webinar because this could vary, because there is some variance based on the going rates of the market rates of interest rate and stuff like that. So I'd rather not mention one that maybe in the future will change, but it is somewhere between 2 and 3% for the most part. And the idea is that the customers can actually enter their credit card information and they can pay you electronically, and within a couple of days you see the money in your bank account. Once you turn on the feature, you can also get paid via ACH. So if your customers choose, or your customers, or Terry's customers for the case that we're doing, if they choose to pay via ACH, that means that they enter their bank account information. It will take a little bit longer to get funded. It takes 5 days, but it will be no cost. So the money will be transferred directly into the bank account at no cost. You have to have your payments account enabled in order to accept both credit card accounts and also ACH payments. So on your credit card payments, there will be a cost per transaction. On the ACH payments, or the sort of bank debit payments, those would be 100% free. It does take 5 days or so for that fully get funded when it's an ACH. So to enable payments, your customer, or Terry in this case, would have to go into the gear menu, into the settings box. They will go into billing and subscription, and then they're gonna click on payments. Okay, they can also, if they go in billing and subscription and payments and it says not subscribed, that's just letting you know that there isn't an active payment subscription. Sometimes your clients will go through the setup of payments and not know that it's enabled. So it'll be useful for you to just check to see if there is some sort of subscription status. Now, I'll make a quick note. If you're transferring from QuickBooks Desktop and there already is an active account, there will be a little bit of a different setup because you just want to transfer the current account to QuickBooks Online. But if you were setting up the account from scratch, you would go into the Payments tab. In the left-hand side of the screen, you will go to Payments, and then it would just have one option that says QuickBooks Payments, and you would click on Learn More. So once you click on Learn More, it will take you to the screen, which will give you the current rates. So as of when this screenshot was taken, the invoice rate was 2.9%. But again, those could vary. And that would have no monthly fee, no hidden fees. That's just the fee. And then there is an option that you can pay a fixed monthly fee and get a little bit of a better discount. And that's usually better for folks that are taking a lot more than maybe 1 or 2 payments a month. Okay. So once you go into the setup screen, it will take you to a full application. Okay, and this is a credit application. It will check the owner's credit to make sure there isn't any bankruptcies or anything like that. It is going to be important for that person to have decent credit. I don't know exactly what the credit guideline is, but you're gonna fill in all the legal information for the business and the legal address and all that stuff, plus the tax ID of the business. Or you're gonna have to go through this whole setting and put all the information. And you're also gonna put the personal information of one of the owners. It could be any of the majority owners of the business. You could put that information in there, also their home address and all that stuff. And you're gonna put the bank account information. So this is the bank. This is the bank that will be used to deposit those the client monies. Okay, whether it's through credit card or ACH. This would be the sort of the main business checking account that will be used to receiving those payments. Okay. Then once that's set up, sometimes you get an answer within a couple of hours. Sometimes it will go through underwriting and take a couple of days. Okay. You should never obviously put the accountant's information in here. This should always be the owner's information, right? This is the owner of the business, not the accountant themselves. And it is the client that needs to accept the merchant agreement, right? Because if there's some issues with credit or something like that, this needs to be on your client's responsibility. So this is something that I always suggest the accountant does with the client next to them, never do it for the client. Okay, that's just a really important step. Now, if you happen to already have maybe the merchant account through the desktop, through QuickBooks Desktop, or maybe they had a standalone payment account or a standalone Go payment account or anything like that, you would want to call the 800 number that you see on the screen so they can connect it to the current QuickBooks Online account. Okay, so we don't recommend that you set up a second account. Just connect your existing account that contains all the history and all that stuff that becomes useful as the sales grow and all that stuff. So it has good history of payments and no chargebacks and stuff like that. That's all going to be relevant. Okay. Now, if you are on a sample file, a QuickBooks Online sample file, you may not see the Payments tab. This will only be on a sort of like an active, real QuickBooks Online account. Okay, so let's go through the advanced settings. So the advanced settings is the last tab after payments. And the advanced settings, this is where you set up things like the fiscal year. Okay, so you can change the fiscal year. This is the same place that you go to close the books. So if you wanted to close the books, you would do it through here. If you want to change the default accounting method from cash to accrual, and this is really just important for reports because QuickBooks can always show you the reports in cash and accruals. One of the great advantages of QuickBooks that it can manage accounting in both accounting methods. But the one that you set up here would be the default. You can select the official tax form. Some of these things are similar from the company settings. This is where you enable or disable account numbers if you want to see account numbers in your chart of accounts. You can enable and disable classes and location tracking. This is particularly important for people that want to have a profit and loss by a division or subsection or some sort of different location of the business, and they want to create these. Now, these two options, classes and locations, are only available in the Plus edition of QuickBooks Online. And then under automation, you will see things like, under automation, you will see things like automatically apply credits. That's if you have a credit for a customer and you create a new customer. Do you want those credits? A new invoice. Do you want those credits to apply automatically? Do you want the option to copy estimates to invoices? So if you create an estimate and then once the client approves it, you want to create an invoice from an estimate, I would say that's a really valuable feature. And things like automatically apply bill payments. Again, if you have multiple bills and you pay a bill for a vendor, do you want all those bills to automatically be marked as paid with the payment that you're creating? And there are also things like turning on and off project tracking, which is a relatively new feature allowing you to see your expenses by project or by sub-customer. You can also turn off and on the field box in the timesheets, the service field. That's assuming that your timesheets are going to be used to get reimbursed from your customers for your time. You want to be able to assign which service you're going to charge your client for. You can also have the option to make a single time activity billable to customer by default. You can turn off and on multi-currency if you want to. And you can change some settings like date formatting and what you call your customers. So if you call your customers clients or if you call them tenants or something like that, then you want to change that what a customer label looks like. Okay. And at the very end, there's a little box that says sign me out if inactive for 1 hour or 3 hours, 2 hours. That's if you are not clicking anywhere in QuickBooks Online. Do you want QuickBooks Online to sign you out automatically? Now, one of the common questions we get in here is, things like how do we close our books? And the way you close your books is it's in the accounting, in the advanced section, in the accounting section, and you click on close your books. And then once you close your books, you have a choice to password protect the books or not password protect them. So you can close them without a password. It's really not that useful. Or when you close them, you add a password. So only the admin that has the password will be the one that will be able to do that. And then once you're done changing whatever settings you want to change in here, you will click on done or click on save, and you'll be able to finish with your settings. Okay, so that's it for settings. Let's now move into chart of accounts. So that's really important. And the only setting that affects chart of accounts from what we just covered would be the setting where we can turn off and on account numbers. And that's really up to us if you want to turn off and on account numbers. But in here, it has to do with setting up your chart of accounts. So a couple of just really important basics, and I know most people watching this webinar are accountants, so this would be pretty simple. But there's going to be 5 types of accounts. There's going to be income, expenses, assets, liabilities, or equity. To add one step further, you will have an income category called other income for the extraordinary income. You will have an expense category called other expenses for your extraordinary expenses. And there's a type of expense that's not mentioned here, which is cost of goods sold. And cost of goods sold will fall into a type of expense. Then under assets, you're going to see different things like bank, accounts receivable, other current assets like inventory, and some fixed assets and other assets. And under liability, you're going to see accounts payable, credit card, other current accounts payable, and other current liability and long-term liabilities. But in a nutshell, the 5 basic ones are the 5 that you're seeing on the screen. Now, a couple of really important things to keep aware. Your accounts receivable account for your invoices and your accounts payable account for your bills will be set up automatically by QuickBooks. So you don't have to set those up, okay? You can actually set up multiple AR accounts and multiple AP accounts in your chart of accounts, but QuickBooks Online will only use the default one that it created for the invoices and the default account for the bills. So for the most part, there really isn't much of a need for you to create multiple AP and AR accounts. QuickBooks will also set up a default sales of product income when you turn on inventory. It will by default also create an inventory asset account and a default cost of goods sold account when you turn on inventory. QuickBooks will also set up by default an uncategorized income and uncategorized expense account. So whenever you're downloading bank activity and you don't know what to put in there, or you automatically accept something without categorizing it, it would go into those categories. There's also an unapplied cash payment income account, which is when you pull up a cash basis profit and loss, and you have some customer invoices that have been received but no invoice has been applied to it. That's what that would be for. Or if you have some bill payments where no bills applied to it, you will see an unapplied bill payment expense account. This has to do with cash reporting, cash basis reporting, and all of the accounts that I mentioned here cannot be deleted. They are created by QuickBooks by QuickBooks by default, and they're just really important for you to know that they are there. Can't change them. They are there. Now you can delete any other account that you don't need. You can get rid of. But these are all protected accounts for QuickBooks. So yes, you can delete any account you don't need except for these here. These are default protected accounts by QuickBooks. Okay, so to go into your chart of accounts, you're going to click on the accounting tab on the left-hand side of the screen on the left navigation bar. That's going to take you straight to the chart of accounts section. There's also a tab in accounting called Reconcile, which will you go to reconcile your bank account. We'll cover that later on in one of the modules for the cert prep. You're going to see all your accounts listed. If they are a balance sheet account, you will see a QuickBooks balance. So they will only have a quote-unquote QuickBooks balance if they're a balance sheet account. If they are a profit and loss account like income or expense, they will not be carrying a balance here in QuickBooks. Now there's a tab that says bank balance, and that's really only there if you have it connected to the bank. So if you have your bank account, a loan or a credit card account connected with the bank for automatic downloads, it will download that running balance so you can check how close your bank balance is with your QuickBooks balance. And that doesn't always need to be the same. In some cases it does, but in some cases those could be different. Now to create a new account, you would click on the new button on the top right of the screen, the big green button on the top right of the screen, and it will take you to the screen where you can create those accounts. So when you first create the account, the first question that it will ask you is, what is the account type? And we did mention those 5 account types, right? We mentioned the income, the expense, the asset, the liability, and the equity. But it's actually going to be one step further. On the assets, for example, you will see an option like bank. And there's also something called detail type. And that detail type really is sort of a general guidance to guide you through what the name of the account should be. It's just basically used as an example. But the detail type is not so important to make sure your chart of accounts is correct. But it will require you to choose something within the detail type. But it is most important that you pick the correct account type. Okay? Then you're going to pick a name, which is what you're going to see in the chart of accounts, and a description that you're not going to see in the financial reports, but you are going to see in the chart of accounts if you want to be more descriptive about what those accounts should be. You're also going to see a checkbox for is a sub-account. That's if you want to create an account with several accounts under it. So for example, if you were to create a travel expense and then multiple categories under travel, something like that would be useful for that. Then it gives you a box for balance and as of. I would warn you that this balance and as of is really for accounting professionals that are creating balances with accounts with balances coming from previous years, and I would strongly recommend that you're careful about using these opening balances if you don't know exactly what they're used for. If you're setting up a QuickBooks file from scratch, where you're going to bring in all that information, all the account information, all the balance information, then it could make sense to do this. But if they've been in business only for a few months during that year, you shouldn't be bringing any opening balances. Then once you create the account, you can click on the little triangle on the right side. You can either run a report, you can edit the account, or you can delete the account. If it happens to be a balance sheet account, you can click on View Register and see all the transactions inside of that account through the register. But if it's a profit and loss account, like an income or an expense account, then you're not going to be able to view a register, but you are going to be able to view a report. Either way, if you want to get rid of the account, delete the account, you would click on that triangle and click on delete. And if you're going to edit the name, change the name, or change the type of account, you would click on the same triangle and click on edit. Now, once you go back into any particular account, you can change the type or change the detail type or the name, whatever you want. It will give you a quick warning saying, hey, are you sure you want to change this? At that point, if you're sure what you're doing, you can just click on save and close and you can continue. All right, perfect. So now we're up to polling question number 3. So let me go ahead and run the polling question number 3. And meanwhile, the polling question is up. I will answer some of the questions that are on the questions box. So one question says, why would you not want to bring in the opening balances even if you've been in business for only a few months? I don't understand that. Can you explain? Yeah, so if you've only been in business for a few months, the idea is that you create QuickBooks Online and you enter all your transactions from scratch. So you're going to bring in from day 0, you're going to bring in every single transaction. When you start a business for the first time, there should be really no opening balances, because all the opening balances will be 0. So that's the reason why when you've only been in business for a few months and you're catching up the books for the entire year, you should not be creating any opening balances. But if you were going to do, for example, all the books for 2018, and this business had been in business for more than a year, and you want to bring in all the opening balances from 12/31/2017, that's where it makes sense to bring the opening balances. Okay? All right, perfect. Now, another question here says, does QuickBooks Online use the same numbering sequence that they use for QuickBooks Desktop? I would say it's similar, but it's not the exact same. So similar, yeah. Okay? Okay, perfect. So let me close the polling question. It's been up for about 1 minute and 45. I'll show the results. Okay, so the polling question says, why would you want to make changes to the default chart of accounts? Well, to add accounts, that's true. So the first one is true. To add equity accounts for different members. I mean, that could be true, assuming that there are different owners in the business. We haven't specifically discussed whether or not Terry's business has multiple owners, but the second one could be true. And to delete accounts that are not relevant to the business. So technically, all these could be true, by the way. So all these could be true. Although we didn't discuss in the use case whether or not there was multiple owners to create different equity accounts for the members, but all these are potentially true. So I'll hide the results. Okay. Perfect. Now, while we're in the chart of accounts, real quick, one of the common questions that we have, and this is covered in other materials, I'm not sure if it's the advanced materials or in the troubleshooting materials, which is not covered in today's webinar. But one of the questions is, how can we merge accounts that are essentially the same or that are similar? So the way to merge an account, you just rename one to be the exact same name as the other one. And as long as they're the same account type and detail type, and you rename them with the exact same spelling, it will actually prompt you to merge them. And you would just hit yes, and it will merge the accounts as if the two accounts never existed, and the history from both will be the same. So that's the answer to your question, Sheila. And then somebody says, can I use your own chart of accounts? Yes, Edward, you can create your own chart of accounts. There is a chart of accounts import feature, which is not covered on this materials. It is covered on the advanced materials. But yes, you can actually import a chart of accounts if you happen to have it in Excel or something like that. Okay, so let's move on to products and services. So in QuickBooks Online, you can create items, and these items are going to be used in sales transactions and purchase transactions. These items could be inventory parts, or they could be non-inventory parts. They could also be services. So in the case of Terry, which is the sample customer that we're talking about, if your customer purchases, if Terry buys memory sticks or hardware that they're going to store in the warehouse and sell later, you want to make this an inventory part. Now remember, inventory, it's only available in QuickBooks Online Plus. If they have things like cables or connectors that maybe she doesn't want to track as inventory, she can include them on the invoices and sell them and make them non-inventory parts because maybe she doesn't want to track stock items. And then for anything having to do with technical support or services that she's rendering to the customers, they would pick a service type of item. Now, if she wants to bundle a product and a service or multiple services put together, maybe even at a discount or a different price while they're at it, they can create a bundle. And a bundle would be to add one or more services, inventory or non-inventory, into one package. And they can also change the quantities that go in that bundle. So that's only useful for if you want to speed up the process of creating invoices that contain multiple items all in one shot. Okay, so to add your products and services, you're going to click on the gear menu. Then you're going to click on products and services under the list column, which is the second column. Once you click on products and services, which you can also access, by the way, by clicking on the sales tab on the left hand side and then clicking on the products and services tab. So there's two ways to do that. Then to create a new product or service, you would click on new, and then you would select what type of item you're creating. So whether you're creating a non-inventory part, a service, a bundle, or an inventory, you would choose it at this point. So we're going to pick service, for example. We're going to create a service, and we'll create a service called on-site service. So all we have to do is select the name of the service. We're going to call it on-site service. We're going to click on the checkbox that says, I sell this product to my customers. That tells QuickBooks that you want this item to show up on estimates or invoices. You're going to select the price or the rate, whether it's a flat fee or maybe some sort of hourly rate, you would pick that. And then really important, you would pick the income account that it will be pointing to. So every time you create an invoice with this item, you would select the income account within your chart of accounts that you want that item to point to. You would then choose whether or not it's taxable. So that's really up to you. And if you're going to use maybe a subcontractor to pay for these services, you would pick that option that says, I'm purchasing this product or services from a vendor. In this case, we're not going to do that. Let's say we only charge this to our customers and we don't pay a subcontractor for that. So that's simple. That's how we create items. So one of the things that we want to do is, back in the item screen, is you want to sit down with your customer and you want to talk about what are all the possible products and services that they're going to be selling or they're going to be quoting on, and create all those products with all those prices up front. That way, the QuickBooks end user doesn't have to be creating products on the fly as they're invoicing or creating estimates for their services. So that's a really valuable piece about consulting with your clients on this. Okay? All right. So let's talk about adding customers now. So to add customers, and that's going to be your customers in your database of customers, we're going to click on the Sales tab on the left-hand side, and then we're going to click on Customers. When you first launch QuickBooks, it will give you this sort of simplified box that says Add Your First Customer, where you add just the customer's name, phone number, and email. And once you've added your first customer, the screen will look a little bit different. It will be like the one that's on the right side, where you're going to see your entire list of customers, the opening balance. You will also be able to customize what that screen looks like by clicking on the little gear menu on the right side, the smaller gear, not the one all the way in the top. And to create a new customer, we simply click on the new customer green button on the top side of the screen. The new customer screen is fairly simple. We put the first name and the last name, assuming this is an individual customer. We can skip first name and last name if our customer, it's a business. We can just put the customer's business name. Display name as is what the QuickBooks customer name will look like, even if the legal name is different. So if you want the name in QuickBooks to look different than maybe on the invoice, display name would be what that is. You can also choose, if you write a check to that customer, which is not that common, but if you write a check to the customer, what that would look like when you print the check. You will enter the address, any notes, whether or not they have a default sales tax rate, what the default terms are, if they have a different shipping address, and if you want to add any attachments to those customers. So you can add a contract or a resale tax certificate, anything you think is relevant for you to keep on the cloud in QuickBooks for that. So we'll create the first customer, we'll call them Folsom Flower Shop. So that's the name of the business that we're doing services for. In this screen, you would put the reseller number. For example, let's say we're not going to charge them sales tax. You would put that in the tax info screen. You can enter their phone number, the email. That email would be where the invoices will be emailed to, if that's going to be the case. And we do have a question on the questions box that says, if I have my customer list on a spreadsheet, could I import them instead of entering one by one? The answer is yes. It's not included in these materials, but that is possible. There's another question that says, what does SKU mean on the products and services? So on the products and services, I'm going to go back a couple of slides here. There's a box that says SKU. That's only if you have a special code that you use on top of the description of the item. So you have the item name and you can have a SKU. So sometimes you'll have like a numerical representation or a codified representation, maybe the manufacturer's part number, something like that could be under SKU. So just wanted to answer that question from the questions box. Now to add a vendor, we click on the expenses tab on the left-hand side, and we'll click on the expenses. Next to expenses, it says vendors, and that will take you straight into the vendors screen. So the vendors will be all the people that you pay money to. So in some cases, this would be vendors that send you invoices and you create bills for them. In some cases, this will be vendors that we would just use our debit card or credit card to make trivial expenses from, like gas stations and stuff like that. They will all fall into vendors. In a nutshell, in QuickBooks, if you transact with anyone that's not a customer or an employee for payroll, it's going to fall into the vendors tab. To create a new vendor, we'll create in the new vendors button on the top right of the screen, and we enter the same information that we would as if we're creating a customer. The only difference between a customer and a vendor really is that vendors will be used for bills, for accounts payable, and customers will be used for accounts receivable or for invoices. In the case of vendors, we could also create we can track the 1099 payments if we want to give them a 1099 at the end of the year. And around January, QuickBooks will enable an option where you can create those 1099s. It is a separate service. It is an additional fee. but it will grab all the information from QuickBooks to do that. And where it says business ID number, that's where you would put the tax ID or the EIN number that's relative to that 1099. Okay. Now we'll talk quickly about importing list. That's actually really valuable. In the gear menu on the list option, there's a button that says import data. And the only thing we'll cover is what we can import. So what we can import is customer list, vendor list, accounts from the chart of accounts, and items or products and services. In every one of these boxes, you can download a sample file, which will be an Excel file that's going to be friendly to QuickBooks. So if you have an Excel file with customer information, item information, account information, or vendor information, I strongly suggest that you download the sample file and you copy and paste the data to conform to the sample file. Because QuickBooks will not accept just any spreadsheet that you try to upload. It needs to be in a very specific format in where the fields could be mapped and worked within QuickBooks. The one warning I will give you is that the accounts capability for importing does not allow for sub-accounts. So you can import parent accounts, but if you're going to create sub-accounts under the parent accounts, you have to create those manually inside of the chart of accounts. Okay, let's move on to setting up bank feeds. So this is the typical process of creating a new file. We'll enter those vendors, those customers, those items, customize those settings. And then one of the most important sort of next steps to get your customer up and running is to connect the bank. One of the most powerful features in QuickBooks Online is this automatic downloading of bank transactions. QuickBooks Online will allow you to bring in the last 90 days worth of transactions from the bank, and it will download overnight. It will give you multiple options like create a new transaction or match existing transaction. We cover bank feeds in detail in other modules, but for now we'll talk about the setup process. So to set up bank feeds, we're going to click on the banking tab on the left hand side of the screen. Then we're going to click on add account. So this is called the banking center. So that banking tab is actually called the banking center. I call the bank feeds because I'm using old terminology, but this is called the banking center. So when you're in this banking center, you're going to click on add account. You're going to enter the credentials of each bank account at a time. So you're going to enter the access. If they have, let's say, two banks, Wells Fargo and Chase, you're going to log into Wells Fargo first, connect those accounts, then Chase after, and connect those accounts. You can connect, for the most part, banks and credit cards. And some banks allow you to connect loans. Loans get a little bit tricky, but for the most part, banks and credit cards is really what this banking center is designed for. Then you're going to map or assign each of the bank accounts to your chart of accounts. Credit cards get a little bit tricky. If you have a credit card that has multiple accounts under it, you may have to create all the different sub-accounts in order to connect them correctly. We cover that on the advanced module that's sort of tricky credit card setup. But just keep in mind that depending on how your bank brings the information, you may have to create multiple credit card sub-accounts in your chart of accounts. So you're going to assign each account, and then you're going to choose whether or not you want to bring in full 90 days, 0 days, because maybe you don't want to bring any old information, 7 days, 30 days. You actually don't get anything more than that. If you want to bring more than 90 days, you have to manually go into your bank account through their website, and you have to download a QBO file. So some banks allow you to download a manual file from the bank account directly that you can manually upload. The direct connection, where you enter your username and password straight from QuickBooks Online, is limited to 90 days. So in some cases, you may have to do a combination. Maybe bring 6 months worth manually through the bank, and maybe bring a couple months worth through the direct bank feeds. And then once you're caught up, then you really don't have to worry about that anymore. QuickBooks will download every day the transactions that you need. Once the bank is connected, you're going to see the bank account set up. You're going to see the checkbox that says all done once they're all downloaded. And you're going to see that there's going to be a bank balance and a QuickBooks balance where it's going to compare the two. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you were going to download the .qbo or the bank feeds file directly from your bank account, you would go into your bank account, download it into your computer somewhere, then you would click on File Upload on the top right of the screen, and then you would map it to the correct bank account. Once that's mapped, it should download whatever date range worth of transactions that you created. So again, you're either going to bring in more than 90 days because you manually went to your bank to download that file, or you're going to just bring in up to 90 days because you use QuickBooks to connect all of them. Now let's see if we have any open questions here. Okay, that says, when you say download, do you mean import? I mean both. So when I say download, Kim, I mean that we go into our bank account, into our chase.com, wellsfargo.com, whatever the website is, and we manually download a file. And then we're going to click on File Upload, which I'll show you back again, the file upload, and that will quote unquote import. So when I say download and import, I may be mentioning the same things, but I may be using different terminology. Okay? All right, we're almost at that halfway mark. So we're going to have a break pretty soon. Let's just finish a couple of slides, and we'll go ahead and have a 10-minute break pretty soon. So let's talk about setting up the sales tax. That would be the next logical place for you to set up if your client has sales tax. So in the sales tax screen, you'll be able to set up your tax payments. You'll be able to set up your tax jurisdiction. You'll be able to set up whether or not they do sales tax in more than one state, which agencies they're dealing with. This is normally state-based. There may be some states in which you have multiple agencies within the state, but for the most part, this will be state by state, and where their home currency, the home sales tax will be, so where they're based. So these are the things that we normally set up on this screen in order for QuickBooks then to guide us on what to do. So we'll click on the Taxes tab on the left-hand side. We'll confirm your physical address so it can set up your home sales tax address. Then you'll be able to tell it whether or not you are collecting sales tax outside of the state. So you say yes or no at that point. Then you're going to put how often you're supposed to pay. And this is something that you would have to know because it depends on the relationship we have with your state. Some states will default you at quarterly. Some states default you at monthly. You would have to talk to your state directly to figure out, after you set up that sales tax account, what your frequency is. You will set up as of when you're supposed to start collecting sales tax as well, and how often you have to file or pay that sales tax. So this is the current scenario. We're going to go into the sales tax center. We're going to enter all the current information. We're going to enter the category, and QuickBooks will sort out all the sales tax rates for you. Now we're going to move into payroll, and that's really up to the customer if they want to use QuickBooks Online Payroll. QuickBooks Online Payroll is an additional service. I won't give the rate, but I'll give around the rate because this could change also. But the rate typically is for full service somewhere around $100 a month, and the enhanced is somewhere around $40 a month. And basically what this allows you to do is potentially calculate your payroll liability, calculate your payroll deductions for each of the paychecks, and generate the net pay, which can either be printed for the employees or they can be paid via direct deposit. With the enhanced subscription, you will be able to file the forms electronically and pay the taxes electronically as well, all within QuickBooks. But you, the end user, or possibly the accountant, is responsible for making those payments. If the customer does not want to that responsibility, or the accountant doesn't want the responsibility of actually paying the taxes or filing the forms, they will get the full service payroll, which works the exact same, but then Intuit or QuickBooks takes the responsibility of actually filing the forms, paying the taxes, and taking care of all the compliance part of it. Okay? All right, so that's the payroll offering. And then some other things worth mentioning before we go into our break. There's some extra things you can set up, such as payment methods, terms, and a full attachments option inside of the gear menu on their list. So let's run one more polling question. And let's run the fourth polling question. And we're about 5 minutes away from our 10-minute break. So we're going to cover a couple of slides after the polling question, and then we'll go on our 10-minute break. Okay, while the polling question is up, let me see if there's any questions here. So somebody says, is the 1099 service included with QuickBooks Online Plus? The answer is 1099s can be printed with your own paper, but if you want them to be filed, electronically filed, you would have to pay that extra service. Okay, so, and most people want that. Okay, if you want, again, just alluding to the polling question, if you want Intuit to take care of all the payroll liabilities, all the payroll filings, you want the full service payroll. If you want, as an accountant, if you want to do those filings and pay those taxes yourself, or if you want the end user to do it, you would pick the first option, online payroll. Somebody says, can we have multiple sales tax rates within the same state? The answer is yes. So you can have multiple rates based on the same state, depending on which county it is or whatever jurisdiction your state does. Okay. Quick question from Lanio says, where do we register to get certified? Well, you have to take an exam after this. So we'll cover that in the last few slides before we end, but we did cover it at the beginning. You have to go to your QuickBooks Online portal and take the exam. Okay. Quick question from Kathy. It says, how many employees can you manage under full service payroll? So the fee that I mentioned, $100 a month, that was just an estimate, by the way. There's actually a gradual fee based on the number of employees. So there's actually an extra $2 or $5 fee per employee. Again, don't quote me on this because this stuff changes. So there's no limit as far as I know. I've never run into a limit. I'm sure there is some physical limit, but the fee goes up based on the number of employees. And then somebody else is asking if there's a cost for the exam. No, the exam is free. The webinar is free, the one that you're attending now, and the exam will be free as well. Okay, so last couple of slides before our break. So our team. So we're gonna go back into the managing all your clients. So we're out of our clients a QuickBooks file. We're back into just our accountant access, and then we're gonna click on team. And what a team allows us to do is allows us to have other people with access to QuickBooks within our firm or within our control, where we can add them to our list of team members, and we can pick and choose what customers they have access to. So to add a new team member, we click on add user, we enter all their contact information. They're gonna get an email, and they're gonna have to create their own access and account on their own. Then after you create the user, you'll be able to choose whether or not that team member will have access to your books. And your books has to do with the internal accounting of the accounting firm. So you can actually choose whether or not you want the accounting firm to be the one that team member access the books. So you can pick and choose yes or no, they don't access our firm's books. But then the most important part is which of my customers will that team member have access to. So for example, let's say I have one of my employees, I want them to have access to Terry's books because I want them to be reconciling her banks or reviewing her books as well. I can add multiple team members to do that. Now your client themselves, when they create multiple users, of course they added us as an accountant user, but if your client, Terry, has her own employees, she can create a time tracking only user, which is basically a user that just logs in, and clocks out type of thing. They can create a reports only user, which will be a user that only looks at reports. They can create another company administrator that has full access to doing the same thing that Terry does as the administrator of the books. Or they can create a custom or a regular user, which is what they would do for any sort of average employee. Now, for them to add end users, they go to the same place that they went to add you as an accountant. They click on the gear menu. They click on manage users. They select the type of user they want to create, whether it's a regular user, an admin, reports only, or time tracking only. By the way, that reports only and time tracking only, it's only available in the Plus edition. If they're logged in as essentials or they have an essential subscription, they would only be able to create a regular user or another company administrator. Now, when you limit the access to the users, you really can only limit them to accessing the customer's side of the transactions or the vendor's side of the transactions. You can also limit the user to be able to create or manage more users, or to be able to edit or change company information or subscription information. Your client will add the contact information of their employee. They'll click on add. The same thing. They will get an invitation and they will create their own access to it. Now, I wanted to share the results of the polling question, because some people are asking, what was the right answer for that polling question? But the answer was full service payroll. That was the right answer. So if you want Intuit to guarantee a penalty-free guarantee where they would take care of all the payroll, payments, forms, all that stuff, that would be that full service payroll option. Okay, we're back. So in order to wait for some of the folks to get back, because it's been exactly 10 minutes, I will just do a quick break here just to show you what are the next steps after you take or we finish with the certification. So when you log into your QuickBooks Online account, you want to click on the ProAdvisor section on the left-hand side of the screen. And then once you click on the ProAdvisor section, you will have two tabs. One is called Benefits, and the other one is called Training. So you want to go into Training. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not considered to be basic QuickBooks Online training. This is considered to be certification training. And anything that's basic QuickBooks Online usage would be under this Introduction to QuickBooks Online for Accountants. This does not contain any information regarding certification preparation. So if you want to just learn about how to work with QuickBooks Online, how to navigate it more or less, you want to click on that Introduction to QuickBooks Online for Accountants. And there's going to be some self-paced training. There's 5 modules in here. Also gives you access to CPE. And if you click on the little webinar icon on the right side of that training options, it will give you a link to register for the webinar. And there is a webinar format that also accompanies that self-paced training. Really, really important. This webinar that you're watching is not the only information that you need in order to take the certification exam. As a matter of fact, when you go into QuickBooks Online certification and you take the modules here, there's training built in. So there's going to be self-paced modules. There's going to be some videos. There's going to be some cases. There will be some text. And as you go through all the modules, all the information that you need will be there, and it'll take you step by step. So this is lessons that you take online. It takes you step by step with all the text at self-paced. So I'm just showing you kind of what that looks like. So this webinar that we're doing it's in addition to, or is additional resources to the self-paced training. So it's not the only information out there to do that. Okay, so you want to just make sure that you go back into your ProAdvisor section in your accountant and click on Training to take your self-paced training and to take your test. Okay, and to take your test, you finish the self-paced training. You would click on QuickBooks Online certification. Okay, right there, it says 7 modules, and then there should be a place somewhere where you can click on resume or take test, and you'll be able to take that test. Also, after you pass the basic certification, you can now take the advanced certification afterwards. I recommend that you have some months of experience with QuickBooks first because it does get a little bit tricky. And there's also a recertification that you have to take every year in order to stay current. So again, that's once you log into your accountant, you click on ProAdvisor and you click on training. And that is the expectation, that you actually log into that immediately after the webinar, and you can take the first 2 sections. So you can take section 1 and section 2 out of the 7. Okay. Now you can take, you don't have to take the exam immediately. You can actually take the exam whenever you want to. There's no limitation on when you can take the exam. It's 100% self-paced. We do recommend that you do it immediately after. Okay. So we've covered so far the first section, the largest part of the exam. Now we're going to cover towards the next 45 to 50 minutes. We're going to cover module 2, or the second section, which is supporting your small business clients. So we're actually going to walk through the workflow, like how does accounting work inside QuickBooks Online. So QuickBooks Online is a very flexible product. It allows you to do things in several ways. There are some different ways of achieving the same results. For example, you can enter invoices to enter your income, or you can skip invoices and go straight into your banking and enter invoices from banking. But it will cause some accounting issues if you don't follow the entire workflow. So you want to make sure that the clients understand the workflow of QuickBooks without connecting to the bank, and then once you connect to the bank, to make sure that the whole flow falls into place. A lot of QuickBooks Pro advisors, a lot of accountants spend way too much time fixing client errors, and it is rather an unpleasant experience for the client because they're paying someone else to fix an error. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for QuickBooks Pro advisors to walk the clients through the workflow, teach them how to do it correctly. So when they're engaging you as a professional, they're engaging you for stuff that matters, like bank reconciliation, making adjustments, understanding reports, that sort of thing. So let's talk about a use case. So Terry gets a check from one of their customers that they repaired a PC. So let's assume that Terry runs their books on cash basis and they don't use invoices. They don't use accounts receivable. So they come in and they click on QuickBooks and they enter a check on the check screen instead of the deposit screen. So this is one of the typical issues that QuickBooks uses, a terminology that most customers may not understand. So in QuickBooks, when you use a check in QuickBooks is a payment. It's when you're paying a vendor. So obviously that's the first mistake. Right? Definitely they should not be using the check screen to create a deposit. Okay. So what they need to do is they either are going to skip the invoice process and the customer payment process and go straight to bank deposit. If they go into receive payment, which is the correct place to do it, and then deposit, that will follow the correct workflow, but there will still be a missing invoice. So the options are they either create the invoice and receive the payment and make the deposit, or skip invoices and receive payment, which is accounts receivable, and go straight into the bank to enter the deposit. Doing anything that skips that process may duplicate accounts receivable or potentially duplicate income. Of course, if they enter the customer check in the check screen, which is actually to create a check payment, that's going to be completely wrong altogether. Okay? So that's just a sort of obviously a really important issue. Also, it should be kind of obvious to your client that when they're creating a check, the payee should be a customer, not a vendor. So that's also a really important piece to make sure the customers know that customers are customers, not vendors. And obviously, you will be, sending the money. You would be taking the money out of the bank account instead of money into the bank account the way it should be. So what is the correct workflow in this case? You would click on the Quick Create button, and you would follow the workflow such as invoice, customer payment, that sort of thing. So the Quick Create button is that plus button that's on the top of the screen. It's usually next to the magnifying glass or next to the gear menu. And then under customers, that's where all your customer related transactions would be. So for example, check, which is the one that we just used, that's under vendors. So that once you explain that to your customer, it should be pretty obvious that no customer transaction should be under that vendors section of transactions. Okay. If you click on the gear menu, which is a little bit different than the quick create button. So the quick create button is to create new transactions, whereas the gear menu is to configure things inside QuickBooks. So that's kind of just an important navigation thing that you want to understand yourself and show your clients how to use. Also on the left navigation bar, they are grouped also sort of logically. So anything that has to do with receiving a customer payment or an invoice would also be grouped in the sales section. So as long as your customer is following the quick create or the left navigation bar, things should start falling into place logically. For example, the correct way to receive that payment from that customer should have been creating the invoice first, itemizing whatever was being sold. In this case, I guess it was just a service for a PC repair, and completing that invoice. Then a second transaction, which would be receiving the payment. That payment would be received either straight into the bank account, or it would go into an account called undeposited funds. More of this is covered in other modules, and it would go into undeposited funds if you're going to be depositing multiple checks into one single deposit. But if that deposit is going to the bank straight, you could select the bank account straight in the deposit to account. So it would be a two-step process if one check from one customer is being deposited straight in the bank, but it would be that three-step process if you're receiving the customer payment and also bundling multiple customer payments at the same time. Okay, so that's the way you would do it. Now, one of the common questions that we have is, what if I'm invoicing and being paid all at the same time, and I want to skip multiple step process? There's a transaction called a sales receipt, and a sales receipt will be an invoice and a payment all bundled into one transaction. And at that point, you can choose whether or not that payment goes straight into the bank or goes into undeposited funds to be able to be bundled with other payments. Now, if you're accrual basis, because we have a question from someone here in the chat, if you're accrual basis, then you will create the invoice when you render the service, and you will receive the payment when you receive the payment. These two things don't have to be at the exact same date. And this is what the sales receipt window looks like, which I mentioned. It's exactly an invoice and a payment both at the same time as one transaction. And again, you would send that to undeposited funds if you're going to make multiple customer check payments at one time, if you're not depositing the check straight into the bank. Now, that's very uncommon, where QuickBooks customers are going to deposit every single check from every single customer as a separate transaction. It is actually more common that if you get 2 or 3 customer checks in one day, they will bundle them into a single deposit. So in that way, in that particular case, you would just use undeposited funds instead of using the bank. So if you want to skip the number of steps, you would have to understand the workflow, right? So am I being paid at the same time that I'm invoicing? Is it happening on 2 different days? And also, is that payment being bundled with multiple payments when I make it to the bank, or is it going straight to the bank, one payment per deposit? Okay. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, the check screen, it's for making payments or money coming out of the bank, not for money coming in. So because the terminology says check, a lot of customers will say, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to use the check screen to receive my customer check. And that's obviously wrong. So those are the things that we found that customers tend to make mistakes right off the bat. Another common issue that we have is the customer will create an invoice. They will skip the receive payment process, and then they will go straight into bank deposit. And then when they go into bank deposit, they pick some sort of income account. The problem with this is that you're going to be duplicating your income, because you'll be creating income at the invoice level and at the deposit level. To avoid that, you want to create the invoice, then receive the payment, and then deposit the specific payment, not skip the receive payment process and enter deposits straight into income. There will be the only case in which you would use the second example where you see bank deposits going straight into income is when you are not creating invoices. But we do recommend that you always create invoices as part of the workflow. Otherwise, you may forget and potentially duplicate that income. The other potential error that happens is the invoice is created correctly, the payment is received correctly. When the payment is received, is sent to the checking account directly, and then again, when the actually deposit comes into the bank, it's now being bundled with multiple payments and going into undeposited funds first to then be deposited together, and then potentially duplicating the deposit again once it's being entered. So again, that's really important to just understand the entire workflow and make sure your customer is using it correctly, or you as the accountant are using it correctly, to avoid potentially duplicating income. Let's talk about delay charges. And the best way to think about delay charges is whenever we're going to perform work monthly. So we're going to perform work throughout the month, but we don't want to create an invoice for every single time we perform the work, or we don't want to be modifying the monthly invoice every single time we do the work. So what we want to do is we want to record every single time the work is being performed, and maybe only invoice once at the end of the month. It's a very typical use case for service-based businesses. So you need to be on QuickBooks Online Essentials or Plus to be able to do that. And delay charges are non-posting transactions. That means they don't affect your books or your accounting until you actually create the invoice related to it. So go to a delay charge, we're going to click on the Quick Create button. Then we're going to click on Delay Charge. It looks just like an invoice, by the way. So you pick the date that you perform the services. You pick all the products. In this case, it could be inventory products. It could be non-inventory products. It could be service. You pick all the products that were rendered or given or done, completed that day. You click on Save and New. And then you can do multiple of these throughout the month. Then at the end of the month, you click on Invoice. You select the customer that you're going to invoice to. You're automatically going to see a sidebar on the right side of the screen giving you a list of all the delayed charges that are pending to be added to an invoice. You pick and choose the ones that you want to pick. You can actually click on Add All, and it will add all those items into your invoice. And at that point, you can add more items or make corrections or save and send the invoice, whatever is it that you want to do at that point. And that's how you create a monthly invoice with multiple charges that you've done throughout the month. Then you can send the invoice if you want to, change the text, click on Send and Close, and the customer will get their invoice. Now let's talk about online invoices, which we talked about at the beginning, which has to do with this digital way that QuickBooks Online sends invoices. Now there's some crucial elements to online invoices, which is you're going to send the invoice from QuickBooks. You potentially want that customer to open it and pay it. That would be ideal. If they don't pay it, you at least know from your side that the customer opened it. The customer could send you a question saying, hey, I have a question about this charge or question about this line item. And that information comes straight into QuickBooks Online, and it becomes a history of the invoice. At that point, you can have a conversation with your client about it. And then if you have payments enabled, the customer can click on Pay Now and fill in their credit card and ACH information to pay you. So when you create the invoice and you have online payments enabled, there will be a checkbox in the top that says Online Payments, where you can choose whether or not you want that particular customer to pay electronically. You can actually choose which customers are going to pay this way and which customers have to pay you cash or check. So as long as those check marks are there, you can pick and choose which way you want them to pay you. If you don't have payments enabled yet, if you haven't enabled it, even if you hit the checkbox, your customer is not going to see a Pay Now button. They will see a View Invoice button, which allows them to view any changes to that invoice, or they can actually see if that invoice has been paid already, The invoices are smart like that, which is great. It updates from QuickBooks Online, but you will only see that Pay Now button once payments is enabled. This is what it looks like from the customer's view, to be able to add any attachments or ask any questions or comments on the invoices with the QuickBooks Online invoice feature. And once you're in QuickBooks Online, you can see the activity in terms of whether or not the customer has viewed the invoice or they have added some comments or questions to that invoice, all within the product, all within QuickBooks Online. Okay, let's move on to undeposited funds, because that seems to be a confusing concept for a lot of QuickBooks users. So in undeposited funds, and the best way to describe undeposited funds is a temporary account where all the customer's payments go into until you take them to the bank. And then you're going to create a deposit that matches your bank deposit slip. So again, the undeposited funds account is that place, that box, that envelope, that file folder where you store all the customer checks, you accepted the payments, you put in the system that they paid you, and then you're going to take them all and deposit them in a single batch once you go to the bank. Okay? So you're going to receive each payment from the customer by clicking on Receive Payments. When you receive the customer payment, you're going to select Deposit to Undeposited Funds. You're not going to select the bank account. Again, because we're not depositing every check one at a time to the bank, we're depositing multiple checks using a deposit slip, and we're going to bundle all those checks together. Then whatever that deposit slip looks like, it's got 2 items, 3 items, 4 items, 5 items. You will actually mimic this in QuickBooks. So the same things that you would list normally in a deposit slip in the bank, and I know some banks are so modern that they don't use deposit slips, or maybe they use ATM deposits, or they create the deposit slip for you. But just think about that old school deposit slip and what that process looked like. Then you're going to click on Bank Deposits once you're ready to take all these multiple customer payments you got from a customer, or multiple cash, by the way. It could work with checks or cash. You will go to Bank Deposit, and you're going to have all your undeposited funds listed in the screen. You will select which bank account you're depositing to. You will select all the different checks that you're taking to the bank in one shot. If for whatever reason you didn't have a check that had to do with a customer, maybe you got a refund check from an insurance company or something like that, you can manually add them in the Add Those Other Funds to Deposit screen in the bottom. But generally, all the customer payments would be in that top area where it says Select Customer Payments to be included in the deposit. Once you select them all, that total deposit amount should match the exact same total amount that's being deposited in the bank. So one of the questions I have here from Lides, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. It says, what if the client's paying via ACH? Do I need to use undeposited funds? The answer is no. Whenever you get electronic payments, like an ACH payment, you're going to go into the bank statement, and you're going to see every one of those deposits individually deposited into your bank account. When your customers pay you via ACH, any sort of electronic payment or wire transfer, those are typically not batched together with other payments. So this undeposited funds is really just a concept that we use for multiple customer checks or multiple cash payments that are being bundled into a single deposit. So thank you for your question. Hopefully that answered that. Okay, we have about 92% of the votes for the polling question. I'll leave it up for another 5 seconds. Let me close the poll and share the results. So the correct answer is delayed charge. So the type of transaction you would use to record charges that you're accumulating over the month, day by day or instant by instance, and then you want to create one invoice with all those charges in one shot, the correct answer would be delayed charge. So that's the correct answer. 80% of you got it right. Perfect. Okay, let's talk about the deposit transaction. So the deposit transaction is really useful for 2 things. One is whenever we're going to enter all those undeposited funds that we talked about earlier, It could also be used anytime you receive money that is not related to a customer. So for example, the owner invests into the company or loans the company money, or maybe an employee reimburses the company back some sort of employee loan that they had paid in the past. Maybe you receive some sort of tax refund, or you get payment back from a vendor for an overpayment, or maybe you got a discount for paying on time or something like that. So anything that has not to do with a customer, it could also go to the deposit screen. So it would be a regular deposit. That would be on the bottom side. So again, you want to focus on that middle section that says select payments to deposit in all your customer payments that would come from a received payment screen or from sales receipts that were brought to undeposited funds. And those additional deposits in the bottom, that's only for things not having to do with customers. So you get a refund from an insurance company for overpayment, a tax refund, something you overpaid. Maybe the owner of the company is investing in the company or lending the company money. That's where that other section would be. My general suggestion is never use customer payments or invoice related payments in that other deposit screen. Okay, only for getting refunds from vendors or something that's not to do with a customer workflow, because you could potentially screw up the correct workflow and duplicate invoices. Now, QuickBooks has a really nifty search feature. When you click on the search box on the top right of the screen, it would actually show you all the most recent transactions. So it will show you about 15 or 20 recent transactions. And then it would have an advanced search for you to specifically search by dollar amount or vendor's name or different things like that. You can actually have multiple filters. So you can search by transaction type and dollar amount. You can search by vendor name and dollar amount or dollar range. So it's just really, really useful. So if when you click on the search box first, you get the most recent transactions. If you click on advanced search, you get a full search screen. In this full search screen, you can then click on any of the transactions that you want to change or modify. In this case, we searched that deposit that we made, and we can change anything we want in that transaction. The other really interesting tool that's inside every QuickBooks transaction is under the More button. So any transaction you're into, whether you're in an invoice, customer payment, a check, whatever it happens to be, you can click on the More button, and then you can click on Transaction Journal. What Transaction Journal will give you is a report that will show you all the debits and all the credits related to that transaction. If there's multiple lines, you will see multiple lines there. In essence, in QuickBooks, behind the scenes, every transaction is actually a journal entry, or it's kind of a journal entry. Every transaction will have at least one debit and at least one credit. Okay. At the end of the day, it would be a balanced transaction. And if you're an accountant and you understand things much better in a sort of debits and credits format, I recommend that every transaction you look at the transactions journal so you can know exactly what's being debited, what's being credited, and the accounts that are being affected during the process. So let's talk about online payments now. So we talked about this earlier, which is how to set up online payments. But let's just take a look at more in depth what this feels like, to the QuickBooks end user and to the customer. As I mentioned earlier, you can pick which customers will have access to paying online. If you have certain customers that you maybe negotiated a price or a rate based on the fact that they were going to pay cash or with a check, and you don't want them to pay via credit card, you can disable that. If you have certain customers that you want them to pay only via ACH, then you can disable the card section and just select the ACH section. So that's really up to you, really, what you want to choose, and this will be customer by customer. Now, if you have, if your customer gives you their credit card number over the phone, that means that maybe they didn't enter it online. You can process the credit card information manually by entering the credit card information, expiration date, name of the card, all that stuff. You can do it straight from here. Now, one of the great features about QuickBooks Online is you can set up recurring sales receipt. And what a recurring sales receipt allows you to do is if you have some sort of agreement with your customer that they're going to pay you a fixed monthly amount or a fixed service in a monthly or quarterly basis, whatever you want to set it up for. You can set up the sales receipt. You can enter the credit card information, and then you can set it up to be a recurring transaction. In recurring transactions, you can pick whether the interval is monthly, quarterly. You can pick the day of the month. And as long as you have a credit card information set up in there, QuickBooks will automatically charge the credit card and include the income in your books. Within a couple of days, you will see that money coming into your bank account. So that's under either the recurring transaction section on the gear menu, or you can create the transaction, click on more, and make any transaction recurring. Okay, let's talk about journal entries. Now, we usually don't recommend end users to be entering journal entries. There are certain transactions that are not part of the workflow. For example, entering depreciation or something like that. That's not part of the standard QuickBooks workflow. Or maybe you want to donate some furniture and you want to have some furniture expense and some contribution expense or something like that. Then that's not something that QuickBooks has standard workflow for. So if there isn't a transaction like an invoice or an expense for you to enter some sort of adjustment, then at that point you would use journal entry. Now, most end users don't really have to deal with journal entries, but that's more of an accountant feature. But all end users have access to it. So I strongly recommend that if you're going to work with your clients and they're going to be accessing QuickBooks, I think they should understand what journal entries are and understand under what circumstances they should use it or not. Now, a couple of just quick notes. All debits and credits total debits and credits must match in order to save the journal entry. QuickBooks won't let you save a journal entry without balancing credits and debits, so that's a good thing. You cannot use items or products and services in the journal entry. You can use a customer or an account or a vendor or an account, but you can't use an item. So if you want to make item adjustments, journal entry is not the best place to do so. You can adjust accounts receivable as long as you specify the customer. And QuickBooks manages accounts receivable customer by customer and manages accounts payable vendor by vendor. So if you want to make an adjustment into accounts receivable or into accounts payable, you must specify the customer associated with the receivable or the vendor associated with the payable. One really cool thing about QuickBooks Online is you can actually use multiple AR accounts or multiple AP accounts in a single journal entry. So you could essentially enter a bunch of opening balances to a lot of customers in a single journal entry, or you could actually, if you have a customer that's also a vendor at the same time, you can adjust the receivable with the payable in a single journal entry. Another limitation of journal entries is you can't have you can't mark anything in a journal entry as billable. So if you want to make something billable, it needs to be a check, or it needs to be a credit card charge. It needs to be an actual transaction. Okay. Now, to create a journal entry, we're going to click on the Quick Create button, and it's under the Other section. And we're going to click on Journal Entry. The journal entry, we're going to pick the two accounts or two or more accounts that are being affected. We pick the total debit, pick the total credit, pick the date. We can give a journal entry a number if you want to match it with some sort of working paper. And you want to add some descriptions just to make sure that if someone else is looking at your journal entry, they know exactly why you did it or under what circumstances you did it. So in this particular case, in this entry, we see our furniture and fixtures being debited. That means that we're increasing our amount of furniture and fixtures, and we are crediting owner's investment, which basically means that the owner put in their own furniture and fixtures or equipment into the business, and we're officially adding a contribution to the business and adding the increase of the asset. So those type of transactions don't have a default workflow. You have to be using a journal entry for that. A couple of scenarios where you would think about doing journal entries for will be things like accrued expenses, deferred expenses, accrued revenues, deferred revenues, and non-cash transactions. Now, there's also an option, if you're logged in as an accountant, to make a journal entry an adjusting entry. And the reason why you want to make an adjusting entry versus a regular entry is maybe you want to differentiate between the entries that your customer makes and the entries that you as the accountant make. Because you can actually create a report of all the journal entries, and you can separate them or split them into the regular journal entries or the adjusting entries. Note, only the accountant user can make an adjusting entry. This becomes also really useful when you're setting up a trial balance. QuickBooks has an option to create an adjusting trial balance that will show your regular trial balance, your end results before an adjusting journal entry, and then after the journal entry. So that's up to you, right? So if you want to include that as an adjusting journal entry because it's something that the accountant is using above and beyond the work of the client, that becomes relevant later on. Okay? Now let's talk about transfers. So transfers are sort of a QuickBooks thing. And what it is a transaction inside QuickBooks that only affects two balance sheet accounts. So if you're moving money from two bank accounts, or if you're moving money from a bank account to a loan, from a loan to a bank account, from a bank account to a credit card, any two balance sheet accounts, you would use the transfer screen. You don't include customer or vendor information or product information or any income or expense information, because the transfer feature is only for transferring money across two internal bank accounts. You will never use transfer if you're transferring money from your bank account to your vendor's bank account. That wouldn't make any sense because that's just a payment. So transfer is for internal transfer between your own balance sheet accounts. So to create a transfer, we click on the Quick Create button, and then under the other section, we click on Transfer. And then notice that you only have two accounts to choose from, only balance sheet accounts. You enter the date, the dollar amount. You can enter a memo if there's a memo associated with the transfer. You can enter an attachment if there's some sort of document associated with the transfer. And you would click on Save and Close, and that will complete that. Okay, let's go to the 7th polling question. Go ahead and launch the polling question. And we only got about 15 minutes left, so we're almost done. So we have this polling question and one more polling question for us to finish. We only got a couple slides left. So we'll finish in time, and then if we have any more time, we'll open up for more Q&A, if we have any options, any time for that. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and complete right on time all the slides so you can get on to taking your exam. So can you create billable expenses with a journal entry? I specifically mentioned that that as a limitation. So that should give you a hint. So there's a limitation of not being able to use billable in the journal entry. So one of the questions I have here from Jana is, how would a client cease a recurring credit card charge? So if you have a credit card charge that's being charged to your credit card, you know that QuickBooks won't be able to control that. That's something that you may have to call the bank or call the vendor and say, hey, can you stop charging my credit card? If your question, Jana, is if you created a recurring transaction where you're charging your client, or your client is charging their customer a monthly credit card charge, they would just go to the recurring transaction section and either end it or expire it or delete the recurring transaction. So Jana, I'm not sure what the question was. If the question has to do with somebody that's charging your own credit card, then you have to deal with the bank or the vendor, whoever's taking money away from your bank account. But if it's something you can control within QuickBooks, you normally just delete or stop or expire that recurring transaction. Perfect. So another question here we get from Hal is, can I take the exam just for the portion that's been covered? The answer is yes. You can actually take Module 1 and Module 2 with everything I can cover today. You don't have to submit the entire exam, but you can submit the 2 sections. So you can submit the 2 sections and you can resume the exam afterwards. Just a quick reminder, I'm going to be doing the second part of this webinar on Wednesday, so 2 days from now at the exact same time. Okay, that one will be a little bit faster paced because there's a little bit more content. The first two tend to be very theoretical, so we go a little bit slower to make sure that we cover all that. Okay, let's go ahead and close the polling question. The correct answer to that is false. You cannot enter billable charges in a journal entry. That's a limitation of QuickBooks Online, or you cannot enter billable charges in a journal entry. Okay, let's go through the other transactions and tools section of this lesson. So we'll real quick talk about purchase orders, estimates, credit memos, and vendor credits. These are all considered non-posting transactions. The first two, purchase orders and estimates, are considered non-posting transactions. So the purchase order is a precursor of a bill, and an estimate is a precursor of an invoice. A credit memo would be sort of the inverse of an invoice. So it would be reversing the income or taking the income back to refund your client cash or to credit towards a future open invoice. And a vendor credit would be reversing a cost or a purchase of inventory, because maybe on a bill in the future you would use it to adjust it, or maybe your customer is going to pay you back because of a vendor credit. So a purchase order, as I mentioned, only available in QuickBooks Online Plus, is a non-posting transaction. You would have to turn it on in the expense section, the accounting and settings, and it can be used to convert it into a bill or copy it into a bill. You can email the purchase order to your vendor if you want to send them sort of an official document of something you intend to purchase from them. The estimate would be, as mentioned, a precursor of the invoice. It's non-posting. It will not be converted into income or post into income. Once you convert it or copy into an invoice, you have to enable that section, that option in the accounting settings if you want to be able to copy an estimate to an invoice. In my opinion, that should be there by default, but you just have to know that's something you have to turn on. And if you want to copy a purchase order into a purchase order, if you want to copy an estimate into a purchase order, so that you estimated you're going to buy a couple of products for your customer approves it, and you want to use that estimate to then tell your vendor to buy something you're going to resell to your customer, then you can use that only on the plus feature. And yes, you can email your estimates to your customers so they can approve it before you convert it into an invoice. As I mentioned earlier, a credit memo would post as a negative accounts receivable or a reversal of accounts receivable, maybe because you're going to use the credit memo to adjust or to apply to an open accounts receivable, or possibly refund your client with it. Same thing with a vendor credit. You're going to apply a vendor credit to a future accounts payable or a future bill, or maybe your vendor will pay you back for that. Now the customer statements, which is kind of the last section here, that would be if you want to send your customer a history of all the open invoices and the payments associated with those open invoices. You have a couple of options when it comes to customer statements. You can do the balance forward, which only really shows you the balance as of a specific start date. So if your customer has settled a balance with you of, let's say, December 31st, 2017, then you will pick balance forward and pick that as a starting date, and it will put that as the beginning balance. You can also do an open invoice. So we'll show you all the open invoices, regardless of how old they are, and all the open payments that have been unapplied, regarding on how old they are. Or you can do the transaction type, where it will just show you all the transactions, money in, money out, into that accounts receivable account within a specific section. So you're going to see sort of the sales column and the payment column. It's really up to you. Recommend that you check them out, see what difference they are to you and which one becomes better for your customers. So let's run the last polling question, and we'll go over the last steps. What is this going to look like in terms of taking the exam? So we'll talk about taking the exam and preparation for the second half of this training. Meanwhile, you answer that. Let me see if there's any open questions in the questions box. So this is being recorded. So if you're having issues with sound, you can replay this later on. I'm not sure what the process is for posting the recording of this, but I'm sure they will notify you. This webinar also gets repeated a few times during the year. I think it's once a month at this point. So you'll be able to watch this again. And all this material is inside of the training section in your ProAdvisor page. So you should be able, regardless of how great the audio was or not, you should be able to have all the materials in the ProAdvisor page. So is it a good idea to start taking the exams right away? The answer is yes. While the information is fresh, start taking the exam right away. You can submit the exams. They will not be graded until you submit all 7, and they don't expire. So you can go back in the future and take the other sections afterwards. You do want to complete the sections, section 1 and section 2. It doesn't save halfway through the section. But once you submit the section, you can always go back and do that. How do you create your account? So there were some slides at the beginning with some links. You have to create your ProAdvisor account, and it's free. So you want to do that first, of course, so you can access the exam. I'm going to the questions to see which questions I can answer. Not all the questions are answerable. Some have some moving parts, so I apologize if your question is not answered. So is this webinar being recorded? Yes. I'm sure you get an email with access to that. How long does it take for each module of the exam? I would separate a good 30 minutes per module. So the whole exam should take a good 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours max, all 7 sections. So I would say 30 minutes per section. It won't tell you right away if you failed or passed each section. You would have to submit all 7. So you can save each section, submit it, and you won't know until you submit all 7 which ones you got right or wrong. Okay? And Edward is asking, how do we get a free account for our firm so we can practice before recommend it to our clients? So once you create your ProAdvisor account, which is free, that will come with a free account for your firm. So you will have QuickBooks Online built in. You may want to check out the webinar that says QuickBooks Online Basics for Accountants, where we cover all that stuff, your firm, your free account, all of that stuff. Where can you see the most current pricing for the products? Just go to QuickBooks.com and go to Buy Now or something like that, and you should see all the current pricing and all the current discounts. They always have discounts running for the monthly subscriptions. Okay, let me go ahead and end the last polling question. So we got a few minutes left, so let's talk about the next steps. So the next step is I recommend that you take sections 1 and sections 2 of the exam. You have 2 days until we take part 2 of the webinar, which is going to be Wednesday, 2 days from now at the exact same time. I recommend that you take the 2 sections. You're not going to get a result. Just take them. Don't worry about it. And then come in fresh without having to worry about taking parts 1 and parts 2. Come in fresh to the webinar so that you can take the other 5 sections after the webinar. Section 1 and section 2 are the biggest ones. So it will take you about an hour to an hour and a half to take the first 2, but it will only take you about an hour to an hour and a half to take the next 5. The next 5 are smaller exams with less questions. Okay, let's leave it open to questions. So let me see what questions we can answer. Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left. So let me pull up QuickBooks again to make sure that there's clarity around how to get into QuickBooks Online. So once you set up your accountant account, it will look like this. You will see this big green bar in the top. You're going to click on ProAdvisor. You're going to click on Training. You're going to scroll down to where it says QuickBooks Online Certification. Remember, there's one called QuickBooks Online for Accountants. This is basic training, overview of QuickBooks, how it works, basically how to do accounting inside of it. So more training about how to use QuickBooks That's going to be in the introduction course. Once you know how to use QuickBooks, you're going to take the QuickBooks Online certification, which is what you have prepared for. You're going to click here on the right-hand side. You're going to click on Start Exam or Start, and you're going to follow that. There's going to be self-paced training all built into it. If you don't have an account, let me show you what that process looks like. So let me go into a blank browser here. So you will go to QuickBooks.com. Let's say you don't have an account. So you say you started the webinar, you don't have your ProAdvisor account. We're going to click on the accountant section. So I believe it's QuickBooks.com/ProAdvisor. Make sure I don't have that right. So it's QuickBooks.com/ProAdvisor. That should take you straight into the QuickBooks for Accountant screen. You're going to click on the sign up button. There should be several sign up buttons. So you can click on any of the sign up buttons. Just click on sign up. It will ask you for which type of subscription. It will ask you for which type of subscription you would like to set up. If you have already an Intuit ID, you will click on sign in and use your own Intuit ID. If you don't have an Intuit ID, you create a new one from scratch. It's a pretty simple process. Once you create it, it will take you then to the screen. You're going to see a big green bar in the top, and that means you have a free QuickBooks Online accountant account. So that's going to be in the Your Book section. When you click on Your Books, you can click on any of these areas here, and that's your own internal QuickBooks Online account that you can play with. So if you want to play with it before you recommend it to your customers, that's all inside of a free online account for your own firm. Okay? How long is a free account good for? I don't think they have announced whether there's a limitation on how long the free account is. For the time being, I would say there's no limit. I would say forever, but I don't want to obviously be quoted saying forever if Intuit decides to charge for this at some point in the future. It's been about 4 years since they've done it for free. And Intuit's commitment really is to train as many accountants as possible in the QuickBooks Online module so we can create a pleasant experience for new QuickBooks Online customers coming into the platform. And Intuit is a firm believer that you small business owners are almost double the amount of successful when they have an accountant attached to it. So the more accounting professionals that have QuickBooks Online that support their clients through the platform, the more likely our QuickBooks clients are to succeed. So this QuickBooks Online accountant would be the equivalent of a QuickBooks Online Plus account. So you would have all the features that every customer would have. Okay, let's see. What about recertification? So that's going to be, recertification is for folks that already passed the exam, and then every year they have to take the recertification exam, which is much shorter. It's a single exam that they take, not 9 modules, and it usually takes about 30 minutes to get recertified. Okay, I think there's no more. Questions. So if there's no more questions, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you will pass the first 2 sections, and I'll see you in a couple of days.